There's something about the human mind that cannot resist a forbidden game. It might be the challenge, it might be the ritual, but there's something in the back of our minds that whispers, what if it actually works? A lot of us remember being little and playing these games like light as a feather, stiff as a board at childhood sleepovers. These games were supposed to blur the line of reality and something else. But then the internet happened and these games became viral trends. First games and challenges that were supposed to bring you somewhere else or let something else in. Games that ask you to knock on doors that shouldn't be opened, or call things that shouldn't be invited, or stare at the dark until something stares back. And people discredit these games by saying that they're just party tricks or psychological experiments gone wrong, but some people that play these games claim that they are not the same after playing them. And I don't know about you, but I can't resist a game that has to do with liminal spaces or forbidden things. I've played a few of these games myself, but luckily nothing creepy has happened. Though the listeners that sent these stories in say that they have had creepy experiences after playing some of these games. So in this episode of Spooky Scary Storytime, we're going to go over some viral games and games that existed even before the internet, like Nightmare and Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. We're also going to tell one story about Momo, the figure that haunted the internet in 2016, and although that's not a game, I feel like it fits the category. What was believed to be just a creepypasta ended up haunting a lot of people, so we'll talk about that here too. Sit back, enjoy, and let me know if I'm forgetting anything. Are there any games that you've played that I should talk about in a future episode? Let me know in the comments. We'll get right into it. I hope you enjoy. Would you play the most haunted, cursed game of all time? In 1991, an Australian company called Atmosfear released a board game, a video board game at that, called Nightmare, and it played on your deepest fears. It came in a black box and with a VHS tape that included a ticking clock and a figure called the Gatekeeper who counted down the seconds of the game. The Gatekeeper would interrupt the ticking clock to address the players based on the color of their keys, or by the figure they picked to play, a witch, a mummy. But some players claim that this game actually haunted them personally. They claim that the Gatekeeper would speak through the screen and call them by name. Or worse, that after they played, the deepest fear that they had written down actually came true. Somebody wrote in with a story about playing this game and what happened to them after, but before we get into that, I'll play you a little clip I found of the Gatekeeper.
So, you want to play the game? My game. By my rules. I am the Gatekeeper! I rule this game, and you will obey my rules. You will be punished! I'd like to punish one of you now.
So when you started the game, you would start the tape, and mostly it was just a ticking clock, but sometimes the Gatekeeper would interrupt to give instructions or shake the game up. The goal of the game was to race around the board and collect 6 keys before the Gatekeeper could punish you. If you collected all 6 keys, then you got to draw someone else's deepest, darkest fear from the well of fears, and therefore your deepest, darkest fear would not come true. But what creeped people out wasn't the game itself. It was this legend that people who had played the game had heard the Gatekeeper address them directly by name, by fear that they had written down. Some people claim that he would even show up in their dreams long after the game had been finished. The game was re-released in 2004, and to this day, there are still forums online where people talk about the creepy things that happen after playing this game. There are all kinds of fan communities and legends, but there are no verified reports that this game actually causes anything supernatural, obviously. But plenty of people have posted their own proof that the game is cursed, such as their VHS glitching, electronics around, like their TVs or their phones shutting off while playing this game. A girl named Casey said she found this game at a thrift store in her college town. She was about 21, she was with her best friend, and they decided to buy it because what else were they going to do? So they were not roommates, but they invited their respective roommates to come into one of their rooms to play this game that night. She said at that point they had not researched any of the lore around this game. They had absolutely no idea what it was. So they were reading the instructions as if they were gospel. Casey said that the instructions said that you had to write a legitimate fear, not like a jokey fear. You can't just be like, I'm afraid of losing Wi-Fi. You have to write what you're actually afraid of. And so deciding to play this game the right way, they all wrote down their respective fears and put them in the well of fear. They turned off all the lights and decided to play by candlelight. But Casey says when she dropped her fear into the well of fears, it felt like the energy in the room shifted. She swears it got colder. She said, in my mind, I guess I just thought it was something psychological about playing this creepy game. And so play started, the VHS timer counted down in blocky red numbers, and the Gatekeeper interrupted periodically. It started out as cruel but funny. He would give petty rules, harmless banishment here and there. But she said the timing was off. He would pop up just as they started to relax. And she said when he disappeared, it was like he was still there watching. When the count had just passed 33 minutes, she said the Gatekeeper did something that he hadn't done earlier in the game. He asked a question and then he waited. She said it didn't seem scripted. They all actually looked at each other like, are we supposed to answer? Is there somebody listening for us to answer. She said it was so eerie and it made us all hyper aware of the room, each other, and this VHS. And so they're all looking around, waiting for this timer to click back on, and he's still just staring at them from the VHS tape. And then he screams, "Who hides more than one secret?" And she said it scared her so bad that she actually knocked over the wine glass she was sitting next to. And Casey swears his expression changed and he shifted his eyes to look at her best friend Mara. She claims that he said, "Mara, take your fear from the well." Casey and her two friends look at Mara and she is wide-eyed, her mouth is gaping open, and she's like, "What do I do?" And so one of the friends says, no, it must have been a glitch. We must have misheard it. And so she's like, "I'll just rewind the tape because there's no way he said your name," because they're all like, how could this have happened? And as she's about to rewind it, the tape starts glitching and it just repeats, "Mara, Mara, Mara." Her friend is fighting with this VCR trying to get the tape out, and then there was a metallic click and it shut off. They were all visibly shaken, and Casey flipped the lights on as Mara grabbed her fear out of the well of fears. She put it in her pocket. Casey and the two roommates were convinced that it was just a bad VCR or a bad VHS tape that had come with the game, but Mara was not convinced. And so Casey says, "Okay, look, we're going to look up this game." And Mara's like, "What did you bring into the house?" She says, "We're going to look it up. Everything's going to be fine." And so they pull out their phones. They start trying to find information about this game, any lore around it, if the word Mara was actually in the VHS tape, because now it doesn't work at all. And they realize that all of their phones suddenly have zero service. She said, "We decided to go for a walk, and then we went to one of the bars just to get our minds off the whole thing, but nobody else at any of the bars that we encountered had any problems with their phone that night. After about an hour, they all had service again and everything seemed fine." But about 2 weeks later, Mara is MIA, and she said they did have a class together. So she noticed that she hadn't been responding to her texts and she didn't see her in class. So she calls her just to see if she's doing okay. She's not thinking that this is at all related to this game. So she's calling her and Mara is not picking up, and she's sending her texts, and she's going to Mara's roommate and she's like, "Hey, have you seen Mara?" And she's like, "No, she went home for the weekend. She told me she wasn't going to come back until Tuesday," which was the following day. So Tuesday comes, she still hasn't heard anything. She texts Mara again. Mara finally calls her. Casey's like, "I was worried about you, you know what's going on?" And Mara says, "There was an accident in my family. Luckily, everybody was okay, but there was a car accident and somebody she was close to was involved and they were in the hospital." Casey's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And before she can say anything else, like, "Do you need anything? What can I do for you?" Mara whispers to her over the phone, "That was my deepest fear, was losing this person." And so Casey's like, "Of course it is. Like, that's a horrible thing. I'm so happy that, they're still okay. I'm sorry that they're in the hospital." And Mara interrupts her and she says, "No, that was my deepest fear that I wrote down on the nightmare game. When we heard my name being called?" And Casey's like, "Mara, I don't think this has anything to do with the game. I think this is just an unfortunate coincidence." And that's when Mara tells her that she's been seeing the gatekeeper in her dreams. Ever since they played that game, she says he comes to her every single night and he tells her your deepest fear is waiting. She tells Casey she's barely been able to sleep at all because it's creeped her out so much. But the strangest thing is the gatekeeper stopped visiting the night after the accident. It was like he was finally satisfied that the accident happened. Casey said luckily Mara's family member made a full recovery and nothing worse came of it. So that's so good to hear, but she swears this really happened. She says Mara has not seen the gatekeeper in her sleep, but she has also relied heavily on religion since this experience. She said Mara was not a previously religious person, and it was basically like a 180 from the person that she used to be versus now. Casey said she prays constantly, and even though that this is not something that Casey practices, she said she still loves her as a friend and supports her in her decision, but she does fully believe that she turned to religion in order to get rid of the gatekeeper. She said the logical part of her brain wants to believe that this was just an unfortunate coincidence, because the logical part of her mind knows that there's nothing in the tape that could have known Mara's name or known her deepest fear, and she believes that the gatekeeper showing up in Mara's dreams was just psychological. Still, though, she's talked about it at length with the other two girls who were there that night, and they all swear that they heard it say Mara's name. They've replayed the video online, they've watched it at length, and it never, not once, says the word Mara. She said, "I have no explanation for that. I don't know how it happens," but one of the other girls thinks that game allowed something else to come through, which then took hold of the game and targeted her for whatever reason. So what do you think? Unfortunate coincidence or something darker? Would you play the nightmare game? Game that supposedly unlocks this hidden world that you're not supposed to see. Someone had asked in a comment recently if I had ever gotten any stories about red door, yellow door, and I did. But before I get to that story, I feel like I need to tell you the rules of the game because it's important. The game starts in a quiet, dimly lit room with at least two people, the subject and the guide. The subject lies on the floor with their head in the guide's lap, and the guide rests their hands gently on the subject's temples and leans slightly over them. If there's anyone else in the room, they all sit in a circle and watch, and then everybody chants together, red door, yellow door, any other color door. The subject then closes their eyes and imagines a hallway full of doors. Then the guide starts asking questions. What do you see? What color are the doors? Which doors are you opening? And every choice has meaning. Yellow doors generally lead to positive or neutral experiences. Red doors are associated with evil, and black doors you should never enter because you'll get stuck. Those rooms are impossible to escape. And there's other rules too. Don't look in mirrors, don't walk downstairs, avoid clocks, don't speak to figures or people. They're not really figures or people. As this game goes on, there are signs the guide needs to know in case they need to end the game abruptly, in case the subject says that someone's following them. The guide should wake them up. If they stop responding to the guide's questions, the guide should wake them up. And if they see a man in a black suit, the guide absolutely needs to wake them up. Now you know the ground rules of Red Door, Yellow Door. Let's get to Ariana's Spooky Scary Storytime submission. If you're new here, Spooky Scary Storytime is my series where I share listeners' allegedly true, scariest stories, the ones I think nobody else would believe. Said, I know this sounds crazy. I know many people aren't going to believe me, especially if they've never played or heard of the game, but I swear this really happened. In 2022, Ariana and her two best friends heard about the Red Door, Yellow Door game on TikTok, and they decided to play one night while having a sleepover. One of her best friends decided she was going to be the subject first, and her other best friend decided to be the guide. So she goes into this trance-like state. The guide is asking her questions, and she starts describing doors. And that surprised both Ariana and the guide, and they got excited. She starts describing these doors, and all of a sudden, before she could enter one, she said, I see a man in a black suit, and that freaked them out. So they decided they were going to try to wake her up. They remembered from the rules that if you saw a man in a suit, especially with no face, you were supposed to wake the subject up immediately. And so they did, and she came to, and she was a little unsettled. Then they decided to re-look at the rules just in case they missed anything and became a little bit familiar with the game. Then Ariana's friend, who had previously been the guide, decided she was going to be the subject. She became the subject, entered a yellow door, and had a positive experience before she came out of it. Then the first friend that Ariana said was the subject decided she wanted to try again, and so she goes back into the trance. And she starts describing the same hallway of doors that she saw the first time. She enters one door and saw the tall man in the black suit with no face sitting at a long wooden table. She immediately left the room and entered another room, but that room was filled with clocks. She knew clocks were a bad sign too, so they told her to get out. She leaves, she goes back in the hallway, and she enters a third room, which was filled with nothing but bright white light. They weren't sure if the bright white light was good or bad, but they thought they didn't know about it, and so it was best to just wake her out of it. But they had a hard time getting her out of this trance-like state. She said she couldn't get out, and she was locked in. It took some struggle, but eventually she came to, and it was around 2 a.m., but they were all a little unsettled by the whole experience, and so they walked outside for a little while just to shake it off. 2 nights later, the three girls had all but forgotten about the game, and they were having another sleepover at Ariana's dad's house. They were all just sitting around. She said they were just kind of scrolling on their phones, and they noticed the one friend who had seen the hallway of doors and had seen man was all of a sudden sitting there with her eyes closed, her hands clenched shut, and her phone face down. They said, "What are you doing?" Without opening her eyes, she said, "That man is here." Her eyes were still closed, but she was describing sitting at the end of the wooden table that she had described when she was playing that game. She said, "He's looking at me," and all of a sudden she started gasping for air, and so Ariana and her other friend grabbed her. They were pulling her eyelids back, trying to wake her up. They were shaking her. Eventually, they both picked her up, and she woke up crying. That night, Ariana said things just got stranger, and she found her friend slipping back into that state more and more often. She said it felt like something had attached itself to her, but anytime they would ask her in her waking state, she would just say, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember that." At the end of 2024, they asked her again, and finally she said, "Yeah, I remember." She says she's since put more distance between their friendship, but she hasn't asked if she still is visited by that man. There's so much more that happened this summer and with my friend, but I wanted to focus on the parts that still gives me chills, but I wanted to put this out as a warning to anyone considering playing Red Door, Yellow Door. If you're thinking about it, don't. Remember what happened to my friend. She said this is 100% not just a game. If you have played this game, let me know your experience. I have not. I'm too much of a chicken. If there's any other internet lore creepy games that I should explore or look for stories on, let me know those too. I don't know if or why the Midnight Man game has been trending again and going viral, but I've been getting a lot of creepy stories about it. And I was reading through these last night and I could not sleep. So don't watch this video at night. Save it for later if you're about to go to bed. But I'm going to tell you the creepiest story that I got about it so far. But first, promise me you won't do it. You just shouldn't do it. It's literally a blood ritual. When I first heard about it, I thought it was just like an internet hoax, like Bloody Mary, where you stand in the mirror and you whisper her name 3 times. The Midnight Man game originated on the internet around like 2010. I think it was like a creepypasta or something. The person who posted it said they found it in their grandfather's journal on a page stained with blood. And this person said that this was originally like a pagan torture ritual, like they would make people do this ritual in order to meet the Midnight Man. There's actually no evidence that points to the fact that this was a pagan ritual, but that doesn't mean that the people who have tried it have not created a tulpa or something like an entity that they invite in when they do this. So this guy named Mark emails me and he says, "I did the Midnight Man ritual when I was in college around 2016. It was the thing to do back then. He was home at his parents' house on Christmas break. They were out for the night. He was home watching his family dog, whatever, decides he's going to do it. He said he did this basically to prove to his friends that nothing was going to happen. Like, he didn't believe in the paranormal. He was a big horror movie fan. He just wanted to like do it just to spook himself. He just wanted to say he did it basically. So he writes his name on a piece of paper. He pricks his finger. He puts a drop of his own blood on the paper. He lights a candle. He turns out the lights. And at 11:59, he starts knocking on the door. And part of the ritual is you have to knock at the door 22 times on the wooden door. And your last knock has to end precisely at midnight. Then you blow out the candle, you open the door as to invite the midnight man in, you close the door, and you immediately relight your candle. He does all of this. The goal of the game is just to exist without your candle going out until 3:33 a.m. Apparently this is harder than it sounds like because you can't just sit. You have to walk around your house in the dark with only the candle to guide you. If your candle goes out, you have 10 seconds to relight it. If your candle goes out and you fail to relight it in those 10 seconds, you have to form a circle of salt around you and you have to sit inside of it until 3:33 a.m. I guess if you don't do this, the Midnight Man will get you. And that's what Mark said happened to him. One of the rules is you're not supposed to leave your house, but around 2:30 in the morning, he's walking around his house, candle's still lit, everything's fine. His dog has to go out. He's like, okay, I'm going to open the back door, let the dog out. As he opens the back door, the dog runs out, the candle goes out. Because he's standing by the back door, he doesn't have his lighter. So he's looking around the house, can't figure out where he put it in the dark. The 10 seconds has come and gone. So he's like, fine, salt. Goes to the kitchen to grab the shaker. Shaker's empty. He doesn't live there full time, so he doesn't know where his mom keeps the big thing of salt. So he's just walking around the house. He's like, okay, well, I guess nothing's going to happen. And nothing does until about 3:01 a.m. He said he was in his living room and suddenly everything just got completely cold. Like, he had been comfortable up until that point, but all of a sudden he could see his own breath. He said in his email, it was like all of the comfort in the room got sucked out at the same time. And then he hears a laugh. He said it was just a split second, but like it was definitively a laugh, although he couldn't tell if it was a man's or a woman's. He felt all the hair on his neck stand up. He was just like, I didn't like that, whatever. It was probably just a trick of my own mind in the dark. But then out of the corner of his eye, he sees a shadow move near the doorway to the kitchen in the corner. He jerks his head to look and he sees an unnaturally tall shadow figure standing in the corner. He said it wasn't a normal shadow. It seemed to draw all the light in the room toward it. It seemed to absorb any light there was. So Mark's standing there frozen in fear, and then it seemed to take a step toward him and then another. So he's like, I'm out. He runs up the stairs into his childhood bedroom and slams the door behind him. He's standing there. All he can hear is his own heartbeat, his own breath. And then he felt what he described as a puff of air being blown into his ear. He runs out of the room. He's actually stomping around the house at this point as to create as much noise as possible to prevent him from hearing anything. He still thinks it's just a trick of his own mind. He makes it back in the kitchen. He looks at the clock on the stove and he sees it's 3:23, so he's only got 10 minutes left. He continues stomping around the house and then it's 3:34. He turns on the light. He's like, that wasn't that bad. I did it. Now, nothing happened to me. But then he said what people don't know about the Midnight Man is he's not out to get you as in like unalive you. He actually feeds on psychological torture. When he went to bed that night, he had the worst nightmares of his entire life. He tossed and turned all night. He ended up getting up, turning on the lights, trying to go back to sleep, and just didn't really sleep at all that whole night. Ended up going down to the living room, falling asleep on the couch. Around 7 a.m., he just gives up, and he realizes that he never let his dog back in. So he goes to the back door. So he opens the back door, calls for the dog. Dog's out by the tree. It's a fenced-in yard. Everything's fine. Dog walks toward the house, stops at the threshold, and will not come inside. He grabs it by the collar. He tries to bring it in the house. The dog is whining and yapping, and as soon as he brings it in the house, the dog runs right back out. It ran right back out underneath the tree, sat in the grass, and started crying. Mark ends up feeding and watering the dog outside. Later on, his parents get home. His mom comes home. She wants to say hi to her dog. It's like her little baby. She goes outside. She's like, what'd you do to my dog? He's like, I didn't do anything to it. He won't come in the house. Dog still refuses. The next day, the mom takes the dog to the vet. Can't figure out what's wrong with it. It's testing fine. Nothing appears to be wrong. The dog refuses to come in. Mark continues to have nightmares night after night after night. He dreams of shadowy hands coming across him in his sleep. It feels like he's having like sleep paralysis. He is exhausted, but he thinks he is just doing this to himself. Like it's a trick of his own mind because he freaked himself out so much doing the ritual. Doesn't really tell anybody that he's experiencing this, right? Just tells his friends he did the ritual and nothing happened. A couple days after Christmas, he's still home. He goes out with some friends to the bar. He's out past midnight. He looks down to check his phone and he sees he has 4 missed calls from his mom. He thinks immediately something is wrong because his mom is usually in bed by like 8 p.m. So he calls her back right away. She answers on the first ring. She says, is everything okay? He says, yeah. Is everything okay with you? Why'd you call me 4 times? And she said, well, I saw you come in our room. He says, what are you talking about? She's like, you just woke Dad and I up. You were standing in the corner looking at us. She says, are you okay? Where are you? He says, I'm at the bar. And she's just quiet on the other end of the line. And finally she says, are you on something? And he says, what are you talking about? She says, we just saw you standing in the corner of our room, just standing there. And when we asked if you needed something, you just turned and walked out. She says, I went in your room and you weren't in there. And he says, Mom, I've been at the bar the whole time. You must have been dreaming. And she says, no, your dad saw you too. She said, we've been worried sick. We've been looking for you. She says, you need to come home right now. He calls an Uber home, gets back to their house. They're sitting up at the kitchen table waiting for him. They are not convinced to this day that he was not standing in their bedroom that night. He still swears it was not him. And he says to this day, he still has nightmares of shadowy hands, although they've receded a little bit over the years. He says, I'm convinced I let something in, and I'm just sharing this so people don't make the same mistake that I did because I've seen these videos trending again. I know this topic topic is viral again. He says, don't do it. You'll regret it like I do. Have you guys tried this? Do you have any experiences? Let me know. I don't know why this topic is trending. It actually has not popped up for me, but I've gotten 9 stories about it in like the last 2 weeks. So I feel like it must be trending somewhere. Apparently a version of light as a feather, stiff as a board that most people don't play that involves the person who is being the subject, like the board, who is lifted into the air. There's a version of the game where that person recites an incantation that allows a spirit to enter the body while they're in the air. And that spirit is what allows them to levitate. A person named Stacy emailed about this. She said she was at a sleepover growing up. They were playing the game. They wanted to play this game, and one of the girls that's at the sleepover says, you know, have you guys ever played the other version? And Stacy and her friends were like, no, what's that? And so she tells them, and she says, yeah, you have to recite this thing before you go up in the air, and then you allow possession. Stacy said at this point, I mean, she was young. She didn't really know what she was doing. She's like, I guess we were trying to summon demons. Like, I don't know why, but we were down for it. And so she decides she's going to be the subject first, and her friends are all around her chanting. She recites the incantation, lift her into the air with their fingers. And she said as she was in the air, she doesn't know if it was the rhythmic chanting, but she did feel like something was trying to enter her. And she firmly said no. As soon as she says no, she drops back down to the ground. And another friend wanted to try it, but she actually said yes. They were holding her in the air with their fingers. They were all chanting. They heard her whisper yes, and then all of a sudden she seemed to be floating on her own. Stacy swears she actually lifted a few more feet into the air. All the girls started freaking out. All of them started screaming, and their friend dropped back down to the ground. She said we all stopped playing after that, but that feeling of something trying to enter my body never really left me. And then years later, she hears about red door, yellow door, and she says, I guess I wasn't done messing with these things. She decides to play with a friend. She entered as the subject. I've gone into details about how red door, yellow door works in another video, but she comes to a red door. She knew you weren't supposed to open the red doors because something evil was behind it. And she said as she stood in front of this door in this trance-like state, she could feel an evil energetic presence behind the door. She said the only way I know how to describe it, it was very similar to that feeling that I had when I was being lifted into the air when I was playing light as a feather, stiff as a board, and I felt that thing try to enter my body. But I have no other way to describe it, but the energy feels thick and gross, and it feels like something is trying to override everything else you're feeling. But I guess I still didn't learn my lesson because I then dabbled in other games like the chocolate goblins and Ouija boards, but said I believe that psychological fear is a factor with how these games work. But I also believe that your faith has to be stronger than your fear because that's what this stuff is made of and that's what it eats. The more fear you give it, the more it'll sit at your table and beg. She said most of all, she just wants people to know that these energies are not something that anyone should just play with, especially if you're trying to communicate with someone that's passed. If you're really interested in that, there's other ways to do it, but the energy that comes through these mediums, especially Ouija boards, is something that you shouldn't play with. She did say she knows a lot about this stuff, but she does have a burner account, so she's not going to be responding to any comments. But if anyone has any pressing questions, she said she's more than happy to reach out privately if something seems important. Now I hope we all know not to play red door, yellow door, and here's another testimony as to why. This story came from Seffi. He was living in a residential treatment facility called Diamond Ranch Academy, which was shut down in 2023. Apparently the facility failed to find medical treatment for a severely ill 17-year-old. Seffi said, unrelated, but this was very, very sad. She knew the girl. She was a very sweet girl. But anyway, Seffi had 2 friends she'll just call M and T. He was super into witchy healer stuff and taught the girls how to play red door, yellow door, which I've gone over the rules in another video. After she explained the rules, she does remember T saying, remember, if you see the guy with no face or the guy in the black hat or the guy in a black suit, it's a bad sign, like a really, really bad sign. You have to close the door, lock the door, and end the game immediately. Seffi played it a few times with T as the guide and herself as the subject, and she didn't really feel anything even though she wanted to, but then her friend M decided she wanted to play. When M played as the subject, Seffi was her guide. Seffi says, well, do you know all the rules? And M says, no, I don't really care. Let's just get into it. And so she knew that T hadn't explained all of these rules to her, but M was insistent she wanted to go in blind as to get the full experience. As they played, Seffi was excited because M was actually describing rooms and doors that she saw, but suddenly M said, I see a man in a black suit, in a black hat with no face. And Seffi remembered what T had taught her. And she says, oh, no, we need to end the game. And so she says, close the door, come back, we need to end the game. They kind of giggled about it, but Seffi says then she remembered that she forgot to say, lock the door. The very next day, Em was working in the kitchen at this residential care facility, and she was sweeping up when suddenly she felt a stinging pain in 3 of her fingers on her right hand. She looked down and she had 3 bloody scratches in the shape of upside down crosses on each of her 3 fingers. Seffi said that Em started losing things and finding them in places where she knew she hadn't been. Often complained of feeling haunted ever since she played the game. And so this goes on for a few weeks, and finally they decided they needed some help. And so they went to somebody who had worked at the treatment facility. It was a caretaker who was half Cherokee and half Navajo, and they tell her what's going on. And this caretaker takes them out back and decides that she's going to use sage to smudge the girls. Said she took them out to an empty old baseball field, lit the sage, walked around them in circles, and chanted. But from then on, all the spooky things did seem to stop. And she did say that she's not the type to typically believe something like this would happen, especially from just playing a liminal spaces game or a mental game at that. But she said her friend Em is not the type of person to lie about something like this. But she said telling this story, it's not so much about the game. She's really curious about if anyone else had any experiences being treated at a mental health facility. She said, I have many stories from my years of treatment, and I feel like a lot of really creepy things happen in those places. So I'm curious from your audience whether it's related to the game or not, or specifically if anyone has been in treatment at Diamond Ranch Academy. She wants to hear from you. Steffi is her real name. She'll be in the comments. 2016, there was this massively viral, creepy urban legend going around the internet, like going as viral as something could go back then, about the Momo challenge. And it ended up being like a creepypasta hoax, but was it? Because a lot of people said that they had stories that this thing haunted them. And the Momo challenge, if it appeared to you, was said to be this figure that was very creepy. Highly advised not looking it up. I'm not going to include a photo. Okay, pause, pause, pause. If you guys want to see what Momo looks like, I'm going to show you here. I didn't want to post it on the short platforms because I felt like it would creep people out. So I'm going to give you a warning. If you want to see Momo, I'm going to play it in 10 seconds. Okay. So this is your 10-second warning. Look away, turn your computer, turn your screen around. Okay. Here's Momo if you're that curious. Anyway, back to the story. But Momo was a very pale figure with bulging eyes, with no eyelids. It stood on two bird legs. It had black hair. It was a deeply unsettling image. And even the news was reporting about this because people were inserting this image into like children's videos online. People were reporting seeing this thing show up in their dreams after seeing the image, and it would tell them to do horrible things to themselves and others. I got a story about exactly that from someone named Savannah who said that seeing this image made her question her sanity. She said she had seen people talking about it online but hadn't actually seen the image, so she decided to look it up herself. As she remembers where she was sitting when she looked it up, she was in her bedroom. She had two roommates. They were both at work. She was ready for work. It was broad daylight outside. It was just before noon. She was sitting underneath the window in her bedroom, and the door was slightly open. Pulls up this image, and she said, the gut reaction I had to this image transcended anything disturbing I had ever felt in my life. It was unlike anything. It was horrible. I felt like I looked into something metaphysical. Because she was so disturbed, she said she immediately swiped away from the photo. Like she couldn't have looked at it for more than a second or two. And that's when she looks up and, oh, this part creeped me out so much. But she said the door was slightly open and she saw Momo come in her room and start walking across the floor toward her. She said she told herself it was just her imagination. She tried to shake it off, but the image of Momo was deeply etched into her brain. I'm not even kidding, y'all. I'm home by myself right now and I keep looking at my door over there just to like make sure that this thing isn't coming because I just looked at the picture and I'm freaked out. But anyway, Savannah said luckily work was busy, so she didn't really think about it. But as work slows down, she's asking some of her coworkers, like, hey, have you heard about this Momo thing? What do you think? And she didn't share her exact experience because she didn't want them to think she was crazy. But they all kind of just chalked it up to this creepypasta internet hoax thing. Again, she tells herself, yeah, it was just my imagination. But at the end of the night, she ends up closing by herself. It was nearing 8 p.m. All of her coworkers had left. She said she was sweeping the floor. She looks down the hallway, and that's when she sees Momo's face again, staring at her from the dark down the hallway. She said again, she just told herself it was her imagination and she did her best to ignore what she saw and just focus on the task at hand. When she got home, she was lucky because her two roommates were home and she thought that she could relax because she had only seen Momo when she was alone. So she ends up going to bed. She's laying in bed, turned all the lights off, and she had this intense feeling of being watched. And she said she knew it was her. She said her blood ran cold. She was trying not to focus on the feeling, but she couldn't shake it. So finally, she just ended up squeezing her eyes shut. She said like a child afraid of monsters in the closet. Was exactly how it felt, and she could not shake this feeling. So finally she just peeks her eyes open, but her room was pitch black at night and she was trying to make out the familiar shapes but couldn't. But this feeling of being watched from someone or something at the end of her bed was growing stronger. So she just decided, you know what, fine. So she puts on her glasses, turns on her light, and looks down at the end of the bed, and there stands Momo. She's leaned over the bed, her huge eyes staring at her just an inch from her face. She said there was nothing else to do but scream, so she did, and she woke up one of her roommates, and as she screamed, Momo disappeared. Her roommate came in and she said her roommate was Pentecostal Christian, and her roommate believed that both good and evil spirits roam the earth, and if you have an inexplicable feeling of dread or fear about someone or something, it's best to steer clear. Savannah decided at this point that she was going to share what she was experiencing with Momo with her roommate, and her roommate was kind and listened and said, no, I think this is something spiritual, but we can say a prayer together if you want to. And so they did. And eventually her roommate went back to bed and she felt better for a little while. But as soon as the lights went out and she was alone again, she said she closed her eyes and she felt her presence again. And this time she could see her in the dark, standing again at the end of the bed, but she didn't do anything. She just stared at her. Anna said when she saw her again, she didn't scream, but she was still shaken and she didn't know what to do. She was so disturbed and felt her presence was so real that she actually started looking up symptoms of schizophrenia. She said at that point, I just needed something else to focus on. But mind you, the entire time she's looking up this information about mental illnesses, she can still see her standing at the end of her bed staring. Finally laid back down, closed her eyes, and started praying again. But over the next couple weeks, she continued to feel her presence, and she just wanted her gone. Every night she would feel her, but she would pray herself to sleep. And she said that this took a while for it to actually work and to feel her presence fade. But she also attributes this to continuously seeing memes about Momo all over the internet because, again, this was viral at the time. She said it took over a month before she finally stopped seeing her at night, but this experience to her was very real. And she said she's been curious to know if anyone else had a similar experience after hearing about this urban legend or seeing an image of Momo, but she's been too afraid to look it up because she doesn't want to see her image again. She said she used to have an interest in darker spirituality and creepypastas, but not anymore. I think it's interesting to note here if you do decide to look up Momo, or even if you don't. So this image was supposedly based on a Japanese sculpture by an artist named Aso, who had this sculpture called Mother Bird. She says she had no ill intent when she created the sculpture, but she did confirm the sculpture was destroyed in 2018, if that makes anybody feel any better. So, sleep well. Elevator game freaks me out, okay? It just does. I just don't think we should be doing rituals. Even though it's an urban legend, I just don't think we should be rituals that are bringing us to other dimensions, okay? But somebody asked me in a comment if I had ever gotten any stories about the elevator game. And so I searched my email, and I wish I didn't because this story freaked me out. But this woman emailed me. She said back in December at her office's Christmas party, she and her coworkers were talking about urban legends, and they decided to play the elevator game. A little bit of context for anyone who is not familiar. The elevator game is basically this urban legend that originated on the internet somewhere that says if you get in an elevator in a building with at least 10 floors and you follow a sequence of button pushing, you can essentially get off in another dimension. At some point during the game, a woman will come on the elevator and you're not supposed to turn to look at her. You're not supposed to make eye contact. And after she leaves the elevator, that's when you get to this other dimension. This woman says she works in Minneapolis. I'm not really familiar, but she said basically in the area where she works, there's a lot of tall buildings, and the building that she works in specifically is abandoned, a lot of it. I guess after 2020, a lot of people just didn't return to the office. So there's some floors with offices, other floors without it. It's winter, obviously, kind of a creepy vibe. None of them are used to being there at night. So that's how it comes up. And one of her coworkers says, oh, have you ever played it? And she's like, no, I've heard of it. And so they look up the rules, and she's like, I'm not afraid of that stuff. I don't believe in that stuff. I'll do it. As her coworker's reading her the rules, she's like, oh, it comes with the warning. You're not supposed to do it incorrectly, because if you do it incorrectly, it says you could get trapped with the spirit. She's like, yeah, whatever. Just give me the rules. I'm going to do it. She said they were also all like intoxicated at this point, so all their inhibitions were lowered. So they all went out of the lobby. She has this sequence of floors and buttons to push written in a note on her phone. She pushes all the buttons. When she gets to the 5th floor, that's when the woman's supposed to enter. She gets to the 5th floor and her coworker walks on. Her coworker who she was at the party with, and they're giggling and they're talking about the elevator game. She's like, oh yeah, I just wanted to check on you. Anything spooky happened? And she's like, no, nothing happened. Like, whatever. Mind you, they did not work on the 5th floor. They worked on the 7th floor. So her coworker goes back up to the 7th floor, gets off. Then she said she had to push the button for the 1st floor. And if it goes down to the 1st floor, then the game fails. If it goes to the 10th floor, you succeeded and you're now in another dimension. So she pushes the first button, and to her surprise, it goes to the 10th floor. She gets to the 10th floor, she gets off, she's walking around. It's basically what you'd expect. That's an abandoned floor. There's nothing going on. It's just a bunch of empty cubicles, basically. So she said she was walking around on the 10th floor for like 2 minutes max. She was just looking for anything that indicated that she was in another dimension. Obviously, she doesn't find anything. She gets back in the elevator. She follows the sequence of button pushing that she's supposed to do to return to her world. She takes the elevator back down to the 1st floor, and she gets off, and all of her coworkers are no longer in the lobby. She's like, rude, whatever. They probably went back up to the party. So she pushes the button for the 7th floor, gets off. All of her coworkers are sitting around giggling, like have completely forgotten about her. So she walks over to them, and they just like don't even seem to acknowledge her. And she's like, hey, like I did it, like nothing happened. And they just kind of like brush her off, and she's like, okay, rude. Like we just did all this together, you know? And so she just casually rejoins the conversation, whatever. And then she tells her friend who got in the elevator on the 5th floor, like, yeah, I went up to the 10th floor, nothing weird happened. Her friend's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, yeah, after we got off in the elevator, like you came back to the party, I guess, whatever, you forgot about me. Her friend's like, I wasn't in the elevator. She's like, okay, shut up. She thinks that they're all playing a prank on her, which is, she said, like something that they would do. Party ends, whatever, she goes home. She said the next morning is when the weird stuff happened. She woke up to her phone camera on, like recording a video that was 2 hours long. She figured because she got intoxicated the night before that she probably just woke up and accidentally hit a button or something, so she shuts it off, deletes the video, whatever. She's kind of hungover all day, puts her phone on the charger, does whatever, comes back to her phone later, phone camera's on again, it's recording. It's another 2-hour-long video, so she deletes it, and she's like, what is going on? She has a horrible headache all day. She attributes it to the hangover. She goes to bed that night, whatever, wakes up the next day, same thing, headache, phone is glitching, taking videos of her, phone camera constantly turning on and off itself. Then she notices a pattern, which is every time she walks down her hallway from her bedroom to her kitchen, past a mirror and looks at herself, that's when she notices her headache. And she notices this not only in that mirror, but anytime she looks in a mirror. She's just struck with this insane migraine. And then the nightmare started. She started waking up in the middle of the night feeling like she was being watched for a split second. Sometimes when she'd come out of a dream, she would feel like a woman was watching her from the end of her bed. I guess this goes on for 2 months, and then finally she can't take the headaches anymore and the nightmares, so she goes to see a doctor just to make sure everything's fine. The doctor says, okay, well, when did all this start? She thinks about it and she's like, I guess it started the night of the office Christmas party. And then she starts thinking about the elevator game and making the connection. She's like, there's no way. But when she's leaving the doctor, she calls her friend who was at the party who got on the 5th floor with her. She's like, hey, I just need you to be straight with me. Like, were you in the elevator that night? Because you told me that night that you weren't. And she's like, I swear to you, I was not in the elevator. So this woman starts freaking out. And then she gets a new phone, so her phone can't glitch anymore. And her new phone is now doing the same thing. She said this has been going on for 3 months. She emailed me the story back in March. I actually have not heard back from her. I just saw this when I searched for this email. So I don't know if it's still going on, but this is the creepiest part. She said what prompted her to send this story was the night before she sent this email. She was in her apartment brushing her teeth alone in the mirror. And for a split second, she saw a woman standing behind her. She was pale with stringy long black hair, and her head was tilted like she didn't understand what she was looking at. She said she immediately turned around and there was nothing there. She turned back to look in the mirror, and this time she was back, but she was closer. And she heard a whisper in her ear that said, you brought me here. She blinked. This woman was gone. She was like, I am having hallucinations. Her bathroom light flickered. Everything was back to normal. But she ended her email with a warning. She said, Ashley, I don't know what I invited in. I don't know if it's related. I don't know if there's something deeper wrong with me. But can you please tell people not to mess with this stuff? Don't play the elevator game. I post a new spooky scary story time almost every single day. If you have one, I would love to read it. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you more than you know. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel if you haven't already. Hype the video, it helps me out a lot. You can support the channel by grabbing some merch from dogoodstaybad.com. That's the website where you can also submit stories. I want to hear from you. Even if it's not a topic that you think I would cover, you just think it's something that nobody would believe, send it in. I love the weird stories. Thank you so much to all of my patrons and subscribers, especially. You guys make this channel possible and allow me to bring you the creepiest stories that I can find. I have so many more emails to get through, so many more stories to bring you, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon on the next video. Let me know what it should be about. I've got tons of stories, tons of unread emails, no shortage of creepiness. So until next time, I love you. Stay well.